Hey, let's talk about the event nodes in Ventuz today. Like always, I switch to a new scene. You can find the event nodes in the toolbox here under the logic category, and down here you have the event nodes. We will talk about the event node, about the scene event, about the filter, and about the dispatcher. The event node has here some event properties. That's the shot event. That shot event basically triggers the fired output event here of this event node whenever it goes from false to true, right? So if I press this, and then you can see every time it gets true, this event gets fired. The next one we can basically enable if we want to use an incoming argument. And then we also have simply here our invoke method, right? So whenever we press that, then our event gets fired here at the output. Down here, we can set up the invocation. For example, we can give it a specific argument, which I will show you very soon. We can set up a delay and we can basically turn it on and off, right? So let's use that delay first. If I put that to 60 frames, then we will basically have 1 second of delay before here the output event gets fired. And of course, if we disable it, then that invocation will not trigger the output event. So let me also show you the argument pass through. So let's bring in a second event. And let's bind the invoke from our second event to the first. Let's call that event 1. And let's call that event 2. And now let's say I give this first event 1, I give argument of 99, right? And if we go to our event 2, we can see we have here now argument of 0. But if I trigger this first event and we check the second event, then you can see this argument of 99 from the first event got passed through to the event number 2. Let's talk about the scene event. The scene event is basically an event which simply triggers every time a scene gets started, loaded, or you have it in a presentation and your customer opens this presentation. Once everything is loaded, that scene event gets fired. So let me show you that quickly. Let's put here another event and let's give that a delay of 3 seconds. So if we're running on 60 frames, so let's make it 180 frames and let's bind the invoke here to our scene event. Unactivated, okay? And as you also can see, we have here the unactivated event, and this is now bound basically to our event. Now let's simply switch between the scene. If I go to this other scene and now I go back to that scene with that scene event, then you can see after 3 seconds, this event gets fired. Let's talk about the event filter. The event filter filters events based on their arguments. So as you can see, I made here some setup already. This event filter basically will listen to events attached to this invoke with the argument 1 and 2. Yeah, so let's bring it back to 0, 0. And let's say I create here 2 events. Let's create here event number 1. And let's copy that. And let's call that event number 2. And let's set it up so the argument number 1 is here. That's good. And here we will have argument of number 2. That's also good. So let's get them bounded together quickly. And I also want to have something to be able to trigger it. So I simply use the Windows key. And I will copy that as well. And key number 1 on my keyboard. Let's set it up quickly, 1. And this one is key number 2. So this event gets fired when I press my key number 1 on the keyboard, and the event number 2 gets fired when I press the key number 2 on my keyboard, okay? So let's try that quickly. As you can see, we get that argument already here in our event filter, right? And as you can see in the event filter in the output here, we have a fired and we have a rejected. So as you can see, if I press key number 1 or if I press key number 2, which triggers my event 1 and 2, then you can see it gets rejected. So let's set it up. Let's say I only want that this filter get me a fired output when I press key number 1. So I simply type in here number 1. And let's see what happens now. If I press my key number 1, then you can see here it gets fired. If I press my key number 2, it will be rejected, okay? We also can type in multiple filters here, right? So let's say I want to use my filter for argument 2 as well. And let's see what happens now. You can see if I press my key number 1, it gets fired. If I press my key number 2, it gets fired as well. With that third property, you basically can attach arguments to the filtered events. Let's say if my first argument gets fired, yeah, the event with the argument number 1, then I want to attach a different argument to that. Let's say I want to attach to my first event number 1, I want to attach the argument 100. And to my second event, I want to attach the argument 200. Let's see what happens now. As you can see, if I press 1 or 2, then you can see here in the output, if I press 1, we get a 100 argument, and if we press 2, then the argument 200 gets passed through. Let's talk about the dispatcher. The event dispatcher basically allows you to add multiple events to your output, and based on an index, you simply can define which event should get fired, right? So if I press now my invoke, then you can see the index is at 1, so my event 1 will get fired. If I bring that to 0, then you will see here our event 0 gets fired. You also can add multiple arguments down here with that little add button, right? So you can add as many events as you want, and based on your index, you can then fire whatever event you want. Let's set it to index 20, then our event 20 should get fired, and it does. You also can use the incoming arguments from the invoke event basically, and you also can set up a delay in frames.